but we founded Kinda Studios 3.5 years ago, and as the slide here says, we are a neuroaesthetic studio, and we use neuroaesthetics, which I'll teach you all about, to enhance and explore the human experience. So ultimately, our studio sits at this intersection right here. We look at neuroscience, and ultimately, we'll get to the slide in a minute, but neuroaesthetics is the neuroscientific study of how our aesthetics affect us from a brain and body level. Aesthetics, when we talk about it, meaning art, sound, your visual modalities, how you feel in a room, our environments, all of these things which we'll talk about. And so we know, and we've all had our own experiences here in this room about being in a room, going to an immersive experience, hearing a powerful piece of music, and having that change how you feel. And ultimately, we look at what happens in your brain and your body when you're going through these experiences, and ultimately how that affects your actions and your behaviors and your feelings. So ultimately, this stems from, it's a new branch of neuroscience. So we blend neuroscience with the creative arts, ultimately looking at how we can translate this knowledge and really catalyst it from academic labs into creative settings. Because ultimately, there's so much great insight that sits within academia and neuroscience and these really rich labs, but unfortunately, a lot of the insights get stuck there. Unless you're working with clinical populations and groups, there is kind of this missing link sometimes between understanding how to fuel that into creative experiences so that we can design experiences, products, services, ideas, you name it, to really use that knowledge for more powerful outcomes for individuals, whatever we're trying to make. And we'll go through some of those today. Of course, we blend technology with this work because a lot of the work wouldn't be possible without the amazing technology we have to date. So whether that's looking at brain-body imaging techniques, to spatialized sound, to obviously 3D motion and graphics, and ultimately looking at how we can use technology to really frame and create a lot of these experiences we're trying to make. And of course, we also look at well-being. So our studio in specific really looks at how we can use neuroscience, how we can use the creative arts, or neuroarts as sometimes it's called, to really foster greater well-being. And we'll get into what well-being really means in just a moment. But all the work we do kind of sits at this intersection as a crossroads between them, which ultimately means we get to work with a range of amazing people, from the most advanced neuroscience labs to creative technologists, to designers, to sound architects, to visual designers. And so we actually feel quite lucky in the work that we get to do in terms of working at this intersection of all these amazing experts and pioneers in the field. And so, in the simplest way of putting it, our lab basically translates neuroscience research from academic labs, and we create a bridge into creative projects to really understand how you can accelerate those impacts and use them. And we would call this applied science, because how do you actually take the science and really translate a lot of the complex theories and apply them into your work? So what? Why does it matter? How can I use it? And so when we talk about neuroaesthetics, as I said, when we break down the two words, it's the neuroscience of aesthetic experiences. How our experiences of the world around us shape how we feel, how we act, and how we behave. Neuroaesthetics has been around for, let's say, 15 years. I think in 2000 or 1999, Samir Zeki from UCL ultimately found the kind of aesthetic center in the brain, the occipital cortex, and that's really where neuroaesthetics launched. And if we think about it, aesthetics are all around us all the time, from the smell of the person sitting beside you, from the taste in your own mouth of what you just ate for lunch, the noise pollution you might hear on the street, to the temperature in this room. All of those things are affecting us. And so when you think about it that way, it means that when we pull apart all these elements of design that are all affecting us in various ways, it means we can design with more intention. Once we start to understand how all of these things affect us, we can really start to use these principles of science into our design principles themselves to create more meaningful experiences for people, for whatever trying to impact you're looking to have, whether you want to connect and bond people more in your experience, you want to relax people, you want to energize them. We now have greater understanding of the properties of all these modalities and how they affect us. And so most people in the room will be familiar with the neuroscience or psychology of sound or music. This has been around for much longer. And neuroaesthetics effectively expands that further, looking at all the modalities of artwork and what they do. And originally, neuroaesthetics was really looking at how we perceive beauty. Why and how do we find things beautiful? What is our perception of these things? Why and where do we derive pleasure from things? And so the age-old question in neuroaesthetics, which I'm sure that a lot of you in this room might be thinking about in some of your designs, is, well, are aesthetic preferences individual or are they universal? Do we all have the same responses to things? Why would I find something beautiful and maybe you don't, or maybe we do? And the answer with most science really is, well, it depends. We date back to our evolutionary heritage. We all like and react to certain things for a reason. Most of that is because of survival. And so we all will have this strong response to certain aspects. But of course, based on our cultural background, our upbringing, our experiences, the way we were raised, all of these things contribute to what we find beautiful and specific. And so while all of our heart rates might rise when we hear BPM that goes faster, how I feel towards a particular song or a genre of music will be completely individual to me. So of course there is no scientific method to say this is definitely going to affect this person in this way and everyone in the room is going to have the same response. And a lot of what we do with our clients and our collaborators and the creatives that we work with, and I'm sure so many of you in this room, we're really backing up a lot of creative intuition about what you're already doing. Most of the time we intuitively feel we know how to do something, what feels right, what to do in a piece of music to lift somebody up or bring them down. But what we're doing is we're telling you how it happens and why it happens, why it's so powerful, so that you can catalyst new creative ideas for really a further jumping off point to create further impact and do more. So this is in a nutshell what neuroaesthetics is, and I really usually I would ask people to ask questions as we go, because I would prefer to stop talking in the middle, but we'll save it for the end. So this slide is kind of probably hard to see. It's maybe a bit blurry, but you can see here, this is kind of this new paradigm of neuroarts or neuroaesthetics. And you can really see how many kind of crossroads it intersects with. From all of the different aspects of visual arts to literary arts, we're looking at traditional handcrafts to architecture and built spaces. How can we actually design our built environments with greater intention, knowing if we want somebody to be able to focus more in a co-working space, or we want somebody to relax in a meditation room. Or, of course, there's no beating our original primal environments themselves, nature, natural environments. What can we borrow and use from what we know about how natural environments affect us? How do we connect to nature more, for example, something called nature connectedness, which I'll talk about later, as a way to increasing our pro-social behavior, to be better stewards of the world and the planet. Not everything with design, bad way of putting it, but is in vain. It's not all just about what's beautiful. It's about why it's beautiful, how do I feel there, and then what further impact does that have on myself, the people around me, and the world I'm living in. Of course, we know that there's a lot that needs to change in the current landscape of the world, and how can we use these cultural experiences to create richer experiences for people and catalyst them into action to change and deliver some impact. So this is really what we look at when we look at impact, We are really looking at the health impacts. I'll speak a lot today about well-being, but what about the social impacts? Well-being obviously means everything from the way I feel about myself, my physical self, my mental self, all of these different aspects, my energy levels. But what about the social aspects? Social connection is one of the biggest drivers of lifespan. The more people are socially connected with others, the longer they live. There's a study, which is perhaps not pertinent to this conversation, but there's a study that looked at people's social interactions with people in 3 different countries, 3 different cities. I think it was London, New York, and Sao Paulo. And they looked at a 2-person conversation over a 1-hour time span. And in London, the 2 people touched each other once. I think in New York, it was twice. And in Sao Paulo, it was something like over 100 times. And touch is, of course, connected to our close social relationships and how we interact with people. And sure, you could all go out and touch people more with greater consent. It will actually benefit you in loads of ways, but that's not this talk. It will be another conversation. But obviously, the further social relationships that we can have, the better we are at cultivating empathy, caring for our neighbors, and again, just feeling close to others, less distance between them. Economic impacts, creative impacts, as well as environmental impacts, which I mentioned earlier. And so this is really what we mean when we say impact, because of course all the experiences people are designing will be for various reasons. And so when we say we're using neuroscience to increase the impact of whatever you're making, I would love if somebody came to me with another pillar, but we would assume that a lot of them would fall into these 5. But if anyone at the end has a 6th to add, I would love to hear it. So these are some of the partners we work with. This was the slide I was looking for before. We work with everybody from big immersive studios like Marshmallow Laser Feast, to technology companies like 4D Sound, to galleries like the National Gallery, which we run studies for. We're in the middle of completing a 8-episode audio show for Audible, which will be out next year, which you can hear all about the benefits of touch, because it's a podcast about the senses, 1 episode per sense. Yes, there are more than 5, to people like Nike and Bentley and large brands of this nature. So we feel very lucky and very spoiled, actually, that we get to work with such a range of amazing clients and partners. So at the core of what we do is called science-informed design. And what does this mean? You know, this is really what I was talking about before when I was talking about accelerating insights from the lab into creative projects. How can we create an evidence base for what you're designing? And of course, there's multiple ways to do this. You know, we do a lot of consultancy projects for clients where we help them understand what are the neuroscience pillars underpinning what your experience is. You know, we come in at the beginning of projects to kind of at the very beginning understand what is the neuroscience trends and insights happening now that you can leverage to make your idea stronger. Or a lot of the time, you know, not to our preference, but we come in a bit later on once the idea is already fully formed, and we help people really understand what are those neuroscience pillars sitting within their experiences or ideas. And by understanding the neuroscience behind their idea, we can really help them know how to fuel that more into the designs themselves. And so when we say science-informed design, we mean using the evidence base that exists in the scientific literature, translating a whole host of knowledge from academia and putting it into really simple, easy to understand toolkits, design principles, frameworks, or even just ideas to help fuel your creative team. Really understanding the evidence base that exists, and then also potentially sometimes validating your ideas as well. We do have a testing lab, which I won't get into today, which ultimately looks at, you know, how do we actually look at our mobile brain-body imaging services and devices to test your idea in the wild. Everything that we do is about the real world. How do we take science from the labs and catapult it into real-world environments? Because in the lab, we're only seeing part of the picture, you know, and so it's wonderful to see those insights there. But what happens when we go out into the real world and we lose control of the controlled labs? What are we doing then? And so this is really all about, you know, how we create an evidence base for what we're designing. As we said, when we look at science-informed design, you know, ultimately working at well-being. You know, how can we help people feel well? Goes back to the kind of pillars of impact that I spoke about before. And if we could, and actually maybe we can partner on this for another opportunity. I've been talking about this for 3 years, about wanting to create a symposium to come up with a new word for the word well-being. Well-being obviously has loads of connotations that personally, I think push people away slightly. You know, I don't do yoga, I don't meditate, I don't know how to shut off my mind, I don't know how to be still, my body doesn't look good in tight-fitted spandex clothing. Well-being's not for me. And so what does well-being really mean, though? Well, there's so many ways of getting to the same outcome. You know what I mean? You don't need stillness in order to transcend your mind. You can go for active periods of rest. You can go into a flotation tank. You can drum. You know, you can go outside and walk. You can dance. There are so many ways of getting to the same goal. So when we talk about well-being, what we really mean is connection. Connection to ourselves, connection to others, and connection to our environments. And we feel that when we frame well-being as connection, it really has greater accessibility. We can maybe democratize it for more people. When we're talking about accessibility, we're not necessarily talking about just socioeconomic means. We're talking about reaching more people. How do we reach that person that hasn't really ever thought about their well-being before, who maybe comes to a gallery experience because they like culture and art, but we help them when they leave there feel better? Because through the science-informed design process, we've woven in what we know from neuroscience that will affect you in your brain and body into the production elements, into the design. So whether or not this person is going specifically to help them feel well, they're leaving feeling better. And of course, we've all intuitively felt this before. And so the way that we work is we have these scientific pillars that underpin each one of these lenses of connection, as we call them. So when we talk about connection to ourselves, we might talk about our physiology, or my favorite of all the senses, interoception, our ability to sense our internal bodily sensations, or our feeling of embodiment. How comfortable do I feel in my body, or do I feel disembodied? When we talk about connection to others, we're talking about the social connection I spoke about earlier, and we're also talking about things like synchrony. I will get onto this a bit later, but how we synchronize with the people around us. What happens in these collective experiences? Why do I go into a music experience with a bunch of strangers and I leave feeling like a bonded group? And what impact does that have on me in my form of community and social bonding, and how willing I am to help a neighbor and become more generous to those in need? And finally, connection to our environments. We spoke a little bit about built environments and, of course, natural environments, and how do we kind of maximize the benefits of those? How do we increase access to nature, maybe for people who don't experience it? And again, what are the knock-on benefits of that? So unfortunately, we're all living in a world of disconnection. This is basically what I look like at the end of the day when I am in my bed scrolling through my phone. I was at a dinner party on Saturday night, and I was talking about blue light and how much it affects me. But yeah, I still seem to stare at my screen every night when I'm going to bed. My friend said, oh yeah, well, me and my partner, we've gotten into reading again before bed. And I was like, oh, I love that time of life, you know, when I'm not looking at my phone. You know, when I go through phases where I'm reading before bed and I put my phone away, and then I go through phases where I'm just scrolling. And so I'm sure we can all relate to this in one degree or another. But disconnection ultimately means so many things. It means I'm disconnected from myself, my brain and body are disconnected, I don't know what I need, I don't know how to respond to myself. For me personally, when I'm in a state of disconnection, I'm in a state of overwhelm quite a lot of the time. I don't particularly act kindly to other people because I'm so overwhelmed. And also feeling disconnected to others, you know, disconnected, not even noticing the people around us. And so when we are disconnected, we notice more. We notice less, sorry, is what I meant to say. We are less present. Catherine and I recently went to a cabin in Wales from this company called Unyoked. They put these cabins in the wild and kind of plopped in the middle of nowhere. I'd highly recommend it. And we basically just had this permission to do nothing all weekend. We celebrated our 3rd birthday there, and we just laid in bed for a really long time. We cooked meals really slowly. We cooked on the open fire. And we just kind of coined the whole weekend permission to do nothing, and just noticed what happened when we are more connected and present with ourselves and our environments. And we just noticed everything more. We just were able to notice these small things, from how much water we were using, to just how I felt in the morning, to the quality of my breath. And so we really had this notion of realizing the more connected we are, the more present we are. And what does that really mean? You know, presence is kind of that a well-being word again, you know, but what does it really mean? And I think for us it really means to feel more alive, you know, to feel more alive in the world, to feel more awake, to notice more. There's so much happening around us, and when we're disconnected, we miss it. You know, we miss so many of the things around us. And so when we're talking about connection and really the impact that has, it really means everything, you know, because when we're disconnected, we're just switched off from ourselves, we're switched off from the world, and we're not actually taking in all that it has to offer. So I have a couple examples here, I'm just gonna check the time, of what science-informed design really looks like. Because in 3.5 years of doing this work, we realized that it can sound kind of abstract if you don't have some examples to show people. So I have a slide coming up next. It's a project we did with an ITV platform called Woo. And what we did was, this was for Gen Z audiences, and we helped basically deconstruct major label artist tracks and put them into 10-minute sound healing experiences for people that used an audio-visual sequence to do so. The whole series was 4 episodes long on digital channels, and we had kind of 4 states that we placed people in across the 4 videos. One was relax, one was flow, another was embodied, and the final one was kind of an uplift. And I think actually it's a really important thing to talk about here today. I think when we think about immersive experiences in specific, we often think about these physical spaces and these large-scale productions, and we're actually really advocates of also, this digital immersive experience. When we're talking about access, it's really important. There's loads of studies that show people with lower socioeconomic status have lower well-being, and those people with lower socioeconomic status have less access to the arts. They have less physical proximity to the venues where the art is being installed, and also they have less financial access. Most immersive experiences cost money. And so how do we actually take what we know about these amazing immersive designs, which of course are so beneficial for so many reasons, but how do we also digitize them to reach more people and make sure that we're not always just looking at these huge, glamorous, large venues, which we all love, but how do we just make sure we're thinking about everyone? And so I really like to also present digital examples for that reason. So this is just a trailer of the experience.
Warning. These sound frequencies may trigger relaxation, empathy, and make you feel good. Higher frequencies. Only on Woo.
But yeah, there's all different ways we can do it. And so what we did is we used the properties of what we know about these kind of flow states, about nature visuals, nature tones, relaxation, alpha waves, pink noise, integrating all of those things into the production themselves. Let's see. This next one was, okay, just pause. The next video we'll see is a larger campaign we did alongside Marshmallow Laser Feast and Kia, where we were brought in as a scientific consultants and experts to really understand how states of immersion and flow states would affect people. So they ultimately created a series of visuals that ended up in kind of digital billboards across the world to help with Kia's campaign Movement Inspires, and to help people feel more movement within themselves and their own bodies. And so we came in as the science consultants to ultimately help translate a lot of the research into the creative process. And then we also did iterative testing to test the brain-body responses of individuals against 3 different kind of visuals and to really see what people were responding to most. And those are the ones that ended up in the campaign. So you get a sense of all the different things that can be done. And finally, the last thing I'll show you before we move into some of the design pillars that we like to work with is experience that we made called Inspirit, which looks at the neuroscience of breathing and its effect on interoception, that sense that I mentioned, that is your ability to sense your internal bodily sensations. And so we know that controlled breath work, for example, is really powerful for people, but sitting at home and doing a breathing experience on your own can feel like work. Maybe you're not doing it properly, maybe you just don't do it. And so everything that we do is really about how do we take what we know through Eastern contemplative practices, the Western neuroscience behind all of it, and put it into art and design experiences. So it's an experience that uses 3D animation and spatial audio and asks people to breathe in time with an artwork. And there's lots of science to show that the more connected you are to a piece of work, the more you can synchronize it, feel into it. Actually, there's a German word called Einfühlung, which means empathy, actually. The more I can feel into something, the more connected I can feel to it. So we have a trailer for that. So hopefully this gives you a sense of kind of the different range of things that we can work on, and obviously these are only things that we have grasp of some content of in the time for today. So what we're going to explore now is ultimately these 3 lenses of connection. I'm going to rattle through it pretty fast because I probably spent too much time on the first half. When we look at connection, what does it really mean when we apply it into design? And so we spoke already about the mind-body connection. To go through it really fast, duality is dead. The mind and body are connected. One feeds into the other. Our brain tells our body, how to act and move, how to move and walk. But ultimately, we experience the world through our body. We experience the world through our senses, which ultimately live in our body. And that sensory input, those messages about how we experience the world, feed up into our brain and telling us how we feel, how we act, how we behave, and all these things. From my heart beating fast, telling my brain I might be nervous. You might think it's this one-way system from your brain down to your body. I'm scared and it tells my heartbeat to accelerate faster. But actually your heart accelerating is a physiological response to a stimulus that you come in contact with. It could be, a scary bear. I was going to say a scary bear in the Amazon. I don't know if there's bears in the Amazon. A scary tiger in the savannah. Fast to our evolutionary history. That's where it started. But ultimately, it tells your brain that you're scared of something. But of course, it's a two-way street. Your brain also says, I'm scared. I feel nervous. I'm about to go on stage and talk to a bunch of people. My heart accelerates. So ultimately, they're always in conversation with each other. Our brain is simply a prediction machine. Your brain is the primal computer. And actually, when you think about how it's wild to think all your neurons are these wires in this very intricate network, and we think about like AI, actually your brain is constantly rewiring itself and relearning all the time. That's what neuroplasticity is. So you have this exponential growth of learning based on the experiences you have. But ultimately, your brain is simply predicting what's going to happen next all the time, based on your previous experiences. If you didn't do that, it would be highly inefficient. So it saves you a lot of time by predicting what's going to happen next. But if you think about it this way, your brain is simply a prediction machine. So it needs to be updated with all of the new experiences you're receiving from your body. In psychology, they would call this something top-down versus bottom-up. And top-down processing is when you have all of your mental processes kind of telling you what to do. But the more you can receive input through the body, the more you can update your brain on kind of new models and new experiences that you've had. Because if you're always living in your past experiences, then you're not getting updated on new things you learned. And that's why immersive experiences are so powerful, because they stimulate the body in such a large way. We receive all this amazing sensory input through our body that almost washes over us. It's so awe-inspiring that we can't switch off from it. It's so overwhelming in a positive way so much of the time that it really kind of cascades our full body. And so we like to think of the body as an interface with the world. We touch things and we smell things, and sure, your nose exists in your face, but your brain is obviously up here. Your face can be part of your body in this hypothetical world we're talking about just here. But it's really important to think about it that way. And I think the brain is really sexy, especially right now. But I don't think people have enough reverence for the body that allows them to walk around and live through this life, and the fact that it's constantly telling your brain what to do based on these models. And so it's really important to know about this kind of two-way streak of information. And ultimately, your brain is constantly telling your body what you need. Your stomach rumbles, it tells you that you're hungry and you need to eat. So the greater connection you can have between your brain and your body, the more you can respond to your needs and actually be healthier as a result. And so we'll go through what we would call here ways to ignite your immersive experience based on these neuroscience, neuroaesthetics pillars based on our lenses of connection. And so if you worked with us in a project, we would perhaps use one of these design pillars or help you think about it more in your designs to understand kind of how to deliver the greatest impact for what you're making. So, of course, immersive experience have this remarkable ability to really peel back the layers of our being. Kind of what I was saying before about how the fact of, there's no denying it kind of hits your soul, it hits your body, it affects your physiology. And when we do that, it really creates this active transformation. That we can reach the depths of our own souls more than we could have before. And so when we talk about connection to self, one of our favorite things to talk about ever, always, is emotions. And so, emotions, scientifically, are just objective physiological changes in your body. So my heart rate accelerating is an emotion, my stomach rumbling is an emotion, my jaw tightening is an emotion. And it's not actually till my body tells my brain that I've noticed a sensation, that it perceives what's going on and it translates as a feeling. And so, for example, if I'm standing in the front of this room and my stomach is rumbling, I'm nervous. But if my stomach is rumbling in front of a dinner table, same sensation, I'm hungry. And so context is incredibly important, and the brain loves context. And so it becomes very important for us to be able to sense our feelings, to sense our physiology, because those are really fundamental to us really understanding how we feel and being able to read into our physiology and our emotions properly. And so how can we read into things properly? Well, it takes practice. Unfortunately, a lot of us disconnect from our emotions because they're scary and we don't want to deal with them, so we reach for a drink or a cigarette or reach for the fridge or scroll through our phones. And that's one of the ways that we all disconnect. But how can we invite people to feel into their bodies more, to feel into their physiology? Well, there's a thing called aesthetic emotions, which is really powerful. And it's just the fact that aesthetics carry emotions within them themselves. We've all had the experience of listening to a sad piece of music. And listening to that sad piece of music inherently allows us to process our sadness. Because I know that the sadness doesn't belong to me. The sadness belongs to the music itself. And so it creates this psychological distance between myself and the emotion that allows me to process it. And I might not be conscious I'm doing it, but I am. Scary films are another good example. They make my heart jump. Why do people go to, I'm not really a horror film fanatic. Catherine really loves them, but it's not my idea of entertainment. But they're really good because they help you gain more understanding, more emotional literacy of what's going on in your body. And the more times you get to experience this emotion, the more comfortable you feel. Emotions also drive us into action. They drive us into behavior. Shifting our physiology is actually one of the key drivers of propelling someone into action. One of my favorite ever studies to always talk about is about environmental facts. There was a study that looked at presenting people with facts about the environment as facts, and the same facts coded as stories. And we know that we love stories, which is, again, is another talk, but they found that the storytelling group actually made more changes in their pro-social, pro-environmental behavior, more sustainable actions as a result of it. And the reason that that storytelling group made more environmental actions was actually because their physiology was rising and dropping because of the storytelling, because of the dramatic arcs. And actually the rising and falling of physiology really propels you into action. It tells you something is meaningful for yourself. And so as one of the kind of key tools or takeaways I would say for today is really think about how you can shift people's bodies in a positive way to support them and how you can drive that emotional response in their body. Because ultimately, that emotional response drives meaning. And I don't remember if we have a meaning slide or not, but it's maybe my most favorite thing to talk about. I don't think if you don't have a meaning, personal meaning to anything, you're not going to take away anything from it. And in order to have meaning from something, you need to understand it, which is why context is important. If I can't understand something, it's not meaningful for me. I do not understand football. Does not mean anything to me. But it's really important we prime people for experiences so that they can be meaningful for them. Setting up the context of perhaps the story they're about to walk into so they can better understand it, and also help them relate it to themselves. Emotion comes part and parcel with the social embodied experiences, how I can actually feel something more within my body. And we think that our intelligence system lives solely in our brains, but when we think about our metaphors that we walk around with in everyday language, we all say this term, a body of knowledge. Why do we say a body of knowledge? Well, I've accumulated this body of knowledge. Where does it live? It doesn't solely live in your brain. Your body remembers all of these things, and so your body feeds into your brain through your intuition. Here's my meaning slide, but I've already spoken about it. I'm going to breeze past. Transcendence is something we like to talk about just to turn it on its head. Transcendence is this big word with these big visuals we have on the screen. But transcendence for us just means a shift. When we talk about transcendent experiences, people really like to talk about altered states of consciousness, psychedelics. But transcendence is just meaning to transcend. Transcending for us is shifting. How do I make myself? How have I felt differently from when I left to when I walked in and I began? Any small shift of how I felt differently before I started, for us, is a shift and can be transformational. Transformation and transformational, I think, is a key buzzword happening at the moment. There's a lot of talk about transformational travel and transformational experiences. And I think it's important to remember, for us, a transformation is just simply feeling differently, whether that I think about myself or others differently as a result. When we talk about connection to others, we have this power through these immersive experiences to really forge these very deep connections to people. And I think the power of immersive experiences to do so is also for a lot of this nonverbal interaction. A lot of us, when we go back to emotions, we don't have the verbal literacy a lot of the time, or a lot of us haven't grown up in environments where it's okay to talk about these things. And sometimes people just, verbal communication isn't their main means and modes. So how do we actually create these bonding experiences to unify people beyond actual verbal exchange? And how can we create this shared understanding to foster more meaning within one another? And so collective experiences, I'm sure a lot of you are building on this. Within this landscape of collective experiences, there's this amazing term from anthropological philosopher Emile Durkheim, collective effervescence. And collective effervescence ultimately means feeling uplifted, transcended, transformed as one. What happens when I leave myself behind and I feel bonded as a group? I have this shared identity fusion with those that I'm around, and how you feel uplifted as a group. And ultimately, that's what's happening a lot of the time we're in these collective experiences. It dates back to lots of anthropological lineages, whether we are going on pilgrimages together, or we're singing songs around the fire, or we're hunting and gathering as groups, or we're marching in time with one another. All of these things throughout time are the way that we've shared these collective experiences. And this goes back to what I said at the very beginning of the importance of social connection. We are really meant as being social creatures. We're not meant to be individual. Of course, we all need our alone time. But it's really, really beneficial when we can bond with each other as groups and share these experiences. And we love to talk about this because it's not just surface level. It actually roots us to our core. And when we do so, we just feel more connected to our groups and our communities. We share more with others. We become more pro-social. We actually donate to more people. We think of ourselves as smaller a lot of the time because you realize that you're part of this larger thing beyond yourself. So this notion of being uplifted and transformed, not only with yourself, but with others, can be very powerful. And we all know, in terms of social exclusion and loneliness, I think it's important to think about how we can use immersive experiences to actually recover from that, or help people who might have a sense of social exclusion or loneliness. Actually, touch is a really powerful thing for social exclusion. There's a specific type of touch called effective touch, which is really slow stroking. I think the optimal speed is 3 seconds per stroke, and it can only do it on the hairy part of your skin, because the hairy part of your skin carries these thing called C-tactile afferents, and those are specifically for effective touch. And effective touch has this real soothing quality to it. And they did these studies that showed people, when they experienced social exclusion, and then they did effective touch after they felt excluded for something, it soothed them. And they felt less lonely as a result. So if anybody has kids in the room, I don't have any children, but I always thought about this study. If anybody has kids in the room, they come from school and they were bullied or they feel excluded, teach them, give them some effective touch. It's more effective if you do it to somebody else, not yourself, and you can soothe them from it. Small anecdote. Synchrony, I mentioned at the beginning. Synchrony is when we physiologically, emotionally, chemically, neurologically bond with one another. Concerts are a really good one to talk about. We all synchronize with the BPMs of the music. Our heart rates will start to synchronize with the performers on stage, with the other people in the room. Our brain waves will start to synchronize. But not only that, our feelings, our emotions will start to synchronize, and thus our behaviors as well. And of course, I've been asked this before, like, is there a dark side to synchrony? Of course there is. But we like to talk about the positive aspects of these things. And so synchrony is really that kind of core glue of the bonding and the social cohesion amongst people. I'm going to breeze past ritual, but in terms of building things with one another, rituals are a key component of this. All the things I spoke about in the previous slides are really kind of ritualistic behaviors. And then really quickly, because I'm running out of time and I want to save room for some questions, connection to our environments. So one thing to keep in mind when we're talking about multisensory experiences, which I'm sure a lot of you are building, coherence is perhaps the most important thing to remember. Make sure you have coherence in all of the sensory elements you're working with. If you're looking to relax people, do not use citrus smells. They wake you up. Make sure that ultimately everything is connected in kind of one synchronous way, that all the sound matches with the visuals. Our brain loves coherence. It allows it to work more easily. We like things that are easy for us to understand, and so we don't like contrast. And so make sure things are matching one another in the simplest term. Awe, I kind of touched on already, but awe is a really powerful, maybe my favorite emotion, definitely getting a huge spotlight right now in the time of awe, perhaps because psychedelic experiences. So when people go through psychedelic experiences, they kind of have these states of awe, and that's what leads them to these, really kind of altered states of feeling more connected. Awe ultimately shuts down, deactivates your default mode network in your brain. Your default mode network is the kind of seat of self. Anytime you're ruminating or thinking about yourself, your default mode network is switched on. So what happens when I kind of think about myself less? Well, it means that I can think about things outside of myself more, other people. You realize that you're not as important as you thought. And actually, you're kind of a small microcosm of this huge, beautiful world around you. And you can feel connected to universal consciousness, other people. And so what it means is you're more likely to, again, give back to others. There's studies of awe that show people sign their names smaller afterwards. They draw caricatures of themselves smaller as a result. They're more likely to pick up a glove of someone else that fell on the street. And so we don't work with clinical, drug populations with psychedelics. What we do is say, how can we learn about what we know through psychedelics and how powerful they are at shifting people, and use things like awe, which you can experience in your everyday worlds. And awe, of course, is hugely important and happens so much in immersive experiences. The mother of all awe, of course, is nature. Sweeping landscapes, huge waterfalls, beautiful sunsets. Those are the most awe-inspiring. So those are the types of things we're talking about with awe. So hugely powerful. Another time, I wish I had more time to speak. And then finally, let's talk about nature connectedness. Nature connectedness or relatedness is ultimately our scientific measure of how connected we are to nature. My own personal relationship with nature. Keys to nature connectedness are just getting people out into nature more and spending more time with it. But the reason it's so important is because higher nature relatedness as like a scale or measure is specifically tied to sustainable action, pro-environmental behavior, daily small sustainable tasks that I make or change as a result, using less water, less single-use plastics, more recycling, these types of things. And so how we can use these immersive experiences to contribute and enhance people's nature relatedness is something that we kind of look to achieve in some of the ideas and partners that we're working with. That's all. I'll stop rattling through. I'm sorry if I spoke a little bit fast at the end, but I really want to get to a few questions in the group, and I look forward to speaking with a bunch of you, hopefully later at the networking as well. I'm not sure if it's a matter of avoiding, but I think it's just a matter of ethics, really. I think with anything that you're doing, it's a matter of how you can harness something for good or how you can harness it for bad. And so I can only speak for myself and ourselves as a studio, that we're always thinking about how to harness it for good. I think a good example of this is we draw quite a fine line between neuroaesthetics and neuroarts and neuromarketing. Not that neuromarketing is bad, but we are not in the business of working with brands to sell more products. Of course, we're creating branded experiences a lot of the time that are helping people have a better relationship to your brand. As a result of the affinity with your brand, they're probably going to buy more products. But we're not particularly putting shops in retail to actually get people to buy more as a result. There's lots of companies that do that, and it's not bad. But I guess why I'm using that example is because you can choose how you want to use anything. And once you understand the strings to pull and the knobs to turn to give somebody an intentional experience, because that's all we're doing. We're creating experiences, ideas, products with intention, knowing further about how those things will affect somebody. Of course, there's a negative way that you can use that. So I think the answer really lies in, I actually don't, I was about to say, like, I was going to say be careful about who it gets put. There's no way of us controlling who does good things and bad things in the world, and so I think that that parallel is just going to be the same. It's just a matter of who uses it, and thankfully I'm not in charge of who has access to the information. Yeah, it's really good. I mean, awe by definition is a mixture of vastness, which ultimately a lot of the time leads to size, you know, physical size, or it could also mean even like social standing, vastness and accommodation. Something is so vast, so inspiring that our brain actually has to accommodate the new information, and it restructures our brain as a result. So you're so right that awe is often these vast, large, sweeping aspects. There's a lot of really good work from a scientist called Dr. Keltner, who does a lot of work on everyday awe. And I'm pretty sure what he's found is that there's a lot of awe that it gets experienced and it happens in watching other people, other social interactions. So watching generosity or social good amongst other people, hearing stories that have benefited somebody, you know, hearing a story of somebody that was saved, or somebody that had, you know, a life-saving moment, or even a small gesture of kindness from somebody else. And actually hearing somebody else's story puts you into that, you know, this everyday tiny moments of awe. Listening to somebody else's story in the same way is also really, really potent for gratitude, apparently, as opposed to doing your own gratitude practice. Listening to other people is really powerful. And so it's a really good question about everyday awe. There was another study that asked individuals who I think were over 60 to go outside and do these nature walks for 6 weeks. And they had two groups. One group was just instructed to go do nature walks, and one group was told what awe was, just taught them what awe was before they went, primed them for awe, and then had them also go out on their own walks. And those individuals who went on the awe walks, they called it, actually had greater benefits. And I love this study because one of the measures that they did is, instead of, they used scales, but they also had people take selfies every day. And what they found over the 6 weeks was that the proximity, the percentage of the screen that people's faces took up was smaller as the weeks went on, and more in the awe groups, and they had more of the background behind them. So when we're talking about your sense of self being diminished more, it's not all about you. It's not, in the West we have this individualistic society. Actually, there's studies that show in the West we do portrait mode a lot, and we have more of our face on the screen, and in Eastern collectivist cultures, they actually use more landscape a lot more of the time. And so I think teaching people these tiny moments to recognize all around them. Spatial sound is another really good one, but that's not necessarily any less grand. So I think storytelling is something to work with. Thank you.